Caleb Harden read the agency letter one last time, then folded it into quarters and shoved it into his coat pocket, with hands that hadn't shaken since the war. He'd asked for plain. He'd written the word himself. Plain, practical, accustomed to hard labor. No complications. No history. No face that would make every man in Redstone Creek forget his own name. The stage was 40 yards out and closing fast. He could already see her through the window. His jaw locked. His stomach dropped. Every plan he'd made for the rest of his life just walked off a stagecoach in a gray traveling coat and looked him straight in the eye. If you want to see what happens when a man's worst fear and his last chance arrive on the same coach, make sure you subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's find out if Caleb Harden is about to make the worst mistake of his life, or if something is finally about to go right. The stage rolled into Redstone Creek at 2:30 on a Thursday in late October 1878. And Caleb Harden stood at the edge of the crowd with his hat pulled low and his arms crossed, and the absolute certainty that he had made a terrible mistake. He'd written a letter to the agency in Kansas City on a Tuesday night, after 3 whiskeys and 6 months of fence posts and silence. He hadn't been looking for a wife. He'd been looking for a solution. The ranch needed 2 people to run it properly. Desmond Pike, his nearest neighbor, had told him that plain enough last spring, while leaning on a fence rail and watching Caleb try to do 3 men's work before noon. "You're going to grind yourself to nothing," Desmond had said. "You need help." Caleb hadn't argued. He'd just gone inside and poured himself another drink. The agency letter arrived 6 weeks later, with 3 names and 3 short descriptions. He'd chosen Nora Shaw because her file said, "Daughter of a frontier physician, experienced in livestock care, accustomed to remote conditions, no family obligations requiring return. Practical, clean, no complications." He had not asked what she looked like. He had specifically, deliberately, not asked. He was regretting that now. She was the last one off the stage. 2 drummers came first, then a cattle buyer from Denver, then an older couple who immediately spotted people they knew. And then the door opened one more time, and Nora Shaw stepped down onto the dirt of Redstone Creek, and the entire platform went quiet in the particular way that meant every man present was doing arithmetic he had no business doing. She wasn't wearing anything fancy. The gray coat was good quality, but well worn. Her hair was pinned up beneath a practical felt hat. She carried her own bag without looking around for someone to take it from her. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the way she stood, like she'd gotten off stages in 100 hard towns and hadn't been impressed by any of them, and wasn't starting now. Ruth Calloway, who ran the general store and had opinions about everything, materialized at Caleb's left elbow. "Well," Ruth said, "that ain't what I expected." "Nobody asked you, Ruth." "Never do." Ruth's eyes didn't move from the platform. "She's gonna cause you nothing but trouble. Look at her. Woman like that doesn't belong on a workin' ranch. She belongs in a parlor somewhere, marrying money." Ruth paused. "Or she's running from something." Caleb didn't answer, because both possibilities had already occurred to him, and neither one made him feel better. He pushed through the small crowd and stopped 6 feet from her. She saw him coming, and she waited, not backing up, not smiling, just watching him with dark brown eyes that took inventory the way his old Wells Fargo training had taught him to take inventory. Fast, thorough, revealing nothing. "Miss Shaw," he said. "Mr. Harden." Her voice was steady, slightly lower than he expected. "I'd know you anywhere. The agency described you well." "I imagine they did." He glanced at the bag in her hand, then back at her face. I need to say something before we go any further. Then say it. He pulled the folded letter from his pocket. I wrote this agency asking for someone suited to ranch labor. Hard winters, isolation, no comforts to speak of. What they sent me. He stopped, started again. I want to make sure you understand what you agreed to come to. She tilted her head, just slightly. Are you telling me the job is different from what was described? Or are you telling me that you think I can't do it? I'm telling you I have a small house, one hired hand who quits every winter, cattle that need constant attention, and a neighbor who will want to mind my business from the moment you arrive. I'm not telling you what you can or can't do. I don't know you well enough for that. No, she agreed. You don't. Behind Caleb, somebody laughed. He recognized the voice. Jake Pruitt, who worked at the livery and had never been shy about saying what he thought. Caleb Harden, Jake called out, loud enough for the whole platform to hear. You ordered a plow horse, and they sent you a thoroughbred. Caleb didn't turn around. He watched Nora Shaw's face. Something crossed it. Not embarrassment, not anger. Something colder and more tired. The expression of someone hearing a joke she's heard 500 times and is done pretending is funny. Mr. Pruitt, she said, raising her voice without raising her register, addressing the platform behind Caleb without looking away from Caleb. I've been on that stage for 11 hours. I'm tired, I'm hungry, and I have more important things to do than educate grown men on basic manners. If you have something useful to contribute to this conversation, I'm listening. If you don't, she picked up her bag, then we're done here. Dead silence on the platform. Ruth Calloway made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly converted into a cough. Caleb looked at the woman in front of him for a long 3 seconds. Then he reached out and took the bag from her hand. My wagon's out front, he said. We can talk on the road. She let him take the bag. That surprised him. He'd half expected her to fight him for it. There's a trunk on top of the coach, she said. The smaller one, with the leather straps. I see it. He got the trunk, loaded both pieces into the wagon bed, and came around to find her already seated on the bench, with her hat in her lap, and her hands folded, and her eyes on the mountains to the west. He climbed up, took the reins, and they pulled out of Redstone Creek, with the whole town watching, and not a word between them, until the buildings fell away behind them, and the road opened up into open range. You've been a rancher long? She asked. 7 years. Before that? He kept his eyes on the trail. Wells Fargo, detective work. Valuable skill set for a frontier rancher. I thought so at the time. She was quiet for a moment. The wagon creaked. The wind moved through the sage. Then she said, The agency told me you lost a child. His hands tightened on the reins so fast the horses felt it and shifted. That's not something I need discussed. I'm not discussing it. I'm acknowledging it. Her voice hadn't changed. My father was a physician for 30 years on the frontier. I've been in rooms where people lost children, and I've watched other people avoid the subject like it's contagious. I don't avoid things. I find it wastes time. Caleb looked at her sideways. She was still watching the mountains. Your file said your father was a doctor, he said. He was. Said you worked with him. From the time I was 12 until I was 22. He died of fever 3 years ago. I'm sorry. Thank you. She said it without emotion, not cold, just honest. He was a good man and a better physician. I learned everything he knew. Which is relevant to your situation, by the way, if you'll let it be. Caleb frowned. What do you mean? Your nearest physician is Dr. Hendricks in Redstone Creek. I passed his office on the way through. His assistant told the stage driver that Hendricks is out of town 6 months of every year, visiting family in Ohio. She glanced at Caleb. Cattle ranching is physical work. Accidents happen. Infections happen. If something goes wrong on your property, you're 20 miles from medical care. I can provide that care. He stared at her. You can. I have my father's medical bag. I have 10 years of practical experience with everything from broken bones to infected wounds to difficult livestock deliveries. I'm telling you this because the agency probably listed it as a minor qualification, and it's not minor. It's significant. She held his gaze. I want to be clear about my value from the beginning, Mr. Harden. Not because I'm proud, but because I've learned the hard way that people who don't know what you're worth will always underestimate what they're asking you to give. The road curved around a dry creek bed. The mountains caught the afternoon light, going gold at the edges. You talk a lot, Caleb said. When there's something worth saying, the rest of the time, I'm quiet. A pause. You'll find that out. I imagine I will. Another silence, different from the first one. Not comfortable yet, but less sharp. The agency also mentioned, Nora said carefully, that you've had some difficulties with a land matter, a company from Denver making inquiries about purchase. Caleb went very still. That wasn't in my letter to the agency. No, but it was mentioned in the county records that were included in the background file the agency prepares for its candidates. She turned to face him directly for the first time since they'd left town. A man named Gerald Voss filed 2 land inquiries against your property boundary in the last 18 months. Both were dismissed, but the filings themselves are unusual. The legal language used is identical in both documents, word for word. That suggests a template, someone who does this regularly. Caleb felt cold. Where did you read county records? Kansas City. The agency provides background on the properties candidates are being sent to. Most women don't read them carefully. She paused. I read everything carefully. He'd spent 6 months watching Voss's men ride the fence line at distances just far enough to claim they were on public land. 6 months of veiled conversations in town and polite letters from Denver attorneys, and the quiet, suffocating pressure of a man who had money and patience and no particular hurry. Caleb had told no one the full shape of what he suspected, because he didn't have proof, and because, in his experience, men like Voss counted on your silence. You read a land filing and decided to come anyway, he said. I read a land filing and decided the situation required someone useful. Yes. She turned back to the road. I told you, I'm not here for an easy life. The ranch appeared around the last bend in the road as the sun started dropping behind the Rockies. Caleb didn't say anything. He watched her face instead. She leaned forward slightly on the bench, not reaching out, not smiling, just looking at the land with the focused attention of someone taking a true measure of something. Those horses in the south paddock, she said. My breeding stock. Why? The gray mare is favoring her right front. See how she's shifting weight? She's been doing it for at least 2 days based on the stance. That's muscle compensation, not just a momentary adjustment. He looked. She was right. He'd been so busy with the north fence line all week that he hadn't done a proper check of the paddock. He didn't say anything. Also, she continued, your water trough near the barn is cracked on the east side. It's losing pressure slowly. In another week, it'll empty overnight, and you won't know why until morning. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop in the yard and sat there for a moment. How'd you see all that from a moving wagon? My father taught me to look at everything. He said a physician who only looks at what he's called to look at misses half the information. She climbed down from the bench without waiting for his hand. "Where do I sleep?" The house was 2 rooms. He'd known that was going to be a problem the moment the wagon pulled into the yard, and the full smallness of the place was unavoidable. He'd spent 2 days cleaning it, and it was still rough and cold, and plainly the home of a man who'd stopped caring about his surroundings some years back. "There's 1 bedroom," he said. "I'll take the barn." She turned from the doorway to look at him. "You'll do no such thing. It's October in Colorado. Build a partition if it bothers you, or hang a blanket, or set up a cot in the main room. I don't care which." She looked at the room with practical eyes. "What I care about is whether there's work to be done before dark." There was always work before dark. He'd expected complaints about the house. He'd expected at least a pause, some visible swallowing of disappointment. Margaret had stood in this same doorway 7 years ago and said, quiet and final, "Caleb, I can't live like this. I just can't." He'd heard those words so many times in the years since that they'd become a kind of background noise in his own skull. Nora Shaw looked at his house like she was calculating what it needed, not mourning what it lacked. "The gray mare first," she said, pulling her coat off and hanging it on the hook beside the door like she'd done it 100 times before. "Then I'll look at the water trough. Then we can talk about what needs doing in what order." He followed her out to the paddock and watched her move along the fence line toward the gray mare, with her hands open and her body low, calm in a way that horses recognized and responded to. She ran her hands down the mare's right leg from shoulder to hoof, unhurried, thorough. The horse stood for it. "Stone bruise," Nora said. "Not serious yet. Could become serious if she keeps working on it. She needs 3 days off and cold compresses on the hoof." She stood and looked at Caleb. "You work her often?" "She's a breeding mare. I don't ride her hard. She may have kicked something in the paddock, or stepped wrong on a rock." She stepped back, giving the mare room. "I'll check her again in the morning. If the bruising is spread, we may need to poultice it." Caleb watched this woman stand in his paddock in the last light of a Colorado afternoon, talking about his horse's hoof with the calm authority of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, and felt something shift in him that he didn't have a name for. Not attraction, something quieter than that, and more unsettling. Like a door he'd sealed shut years ago had developed a crack. He killed the feeling before it had time to form. "The trough," he said. "Right." They worked until dark. She didn't slow him down. She didn't need instruction. When the trough repair required holding the iron brace in place while he hammered, she held it steady, without being asked, and without adjusting, and without letting go until he told her it was done. When one of the fence posts near the barn gate needed reseating, she was already testing the others down the line before he'd finished the first one. Dinner was beans, cornbread, and the last of the preserved venison from September. He cooked it because he always cooked, and because he wasn't sure what else to do. She sat at the rough table and ate without complaint, and asked him about the winter feed situation, and the cattle count, and the condition of the north pasture. She had a small notebook that appeared from her coat pocket, and she wrote things down while he talked, which he found unusual, and then stopped finding unusual by the second page. "You keep records of everything?" he asked. "How else do you know what you have?" She looked up. "How do you track expenditures currently?" "In my head." She looked at him for a moment, not judging, diagnosing. "That works up to a point," she said. "Past a certain complexity, it starts losing you money. I'll set up a ledger this week." "I didn't ask you to do that." "I know." She went back to her notes. "I'm going to do it anyway, because it'll help us both. If that bothers you, tell me now." "It doesn't bother me," he said, before he decided to say it. After dinner, he hung a blanket down the center of the bedroom doorway, using 2 nails and a piece of rope, and they said goodnight with 4 feet of wool between them. And Caleb lay on his side of the room in the dark, listening to the Colorado wind move off the mountains, and thinking about a woman who'd been here 6 hours and had already fixed his mare, found his trough leak, started a ledger, and identified something about Voss's legal filings that Caleb had stared at for 18 months without seeing. He thought about Margaret saying, "I can't live like this." He thought about the way Nora Shaw had hung her coat on his hook, like it was the most natural thing in the world. He didn't sleep for a long time. The next morning she was up before him. He heard the stove before he was fully awake, the clank of the iron door, the pop of fresh wood catching. By the time he dressed and came into the main room, she had coffee on and was at the table with her notebook open and a map of his property that she'd found somewhere in the stack of papers near the window, smoothed flat and covered in pencil marks. "You have 340 acres you're not using," she said without looking up. "The northwest section. Too rocky." "Did you walk it this year?" He paused. "Last year." She looked up. "Things change. Rocky ground can shift after heavy melt. You may have water sources up there you don't know about." She turned the map toward him. "I want to ride it today." "We've got fence work on the east line." "We do both." She held his gaze. "I can ride the northwest and you take the east line. We cover twice the ground and compare notes this evening." He thought about telling her no, about explaining that he ran this operation on his own terms and had been doing so for 7 years. Then he thought about the trough he hadn't noticed, and the mare he hadn't checked, and the land filing pattern he hadn't seen. "Fine," he said. "Be back before dark." "I will." She took a long drink of coffee. "One more thing." "What?" "Gerald Voss." She set the cup down carefully. "His next land inquiry is going to come through the county surveyor's office. That's the pattern. 2 informal inquiries to establish a record, then a formal survey request that starts the legal process for disputed boundary claims." She looked at him steadily. "He's not trying to buy your land, Mr. Harden. He's trying to make a legal argument that part of it isn't yours. There's a difference." The cold was back. "How do you know about land dispute law?" "Because Edmund Cross, the man I was engaged to in St. Louis, was a lawyer who specialized in exactly this kind of property acquisition on behalf of railroad and mining interests." She said the name without emotion, but something in her jaw tightened, brief and controlled. "I spent 8 months watching him prepare the same kind of filings against a family in Jefferson County before I understood what I was seeing." She paused. "I understand it now." Caleb looked at this woman across his rough kitchen table, coffee cup in her hand and his ranch's map in front of her, covered in careful pencil marks, and felt the ground shift under his feet in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with something much more dangerous. He'd written to the agency for a solution, for something plain and practical and safe. Instead, they'd sent him Nora Shaw and Caleb Harden, who'd spent 7 years building walls against exactly this kind of feeling, had the distinct and terrifying sense that somewhere in the distance, without making any sound at all, one of those walls had just cracked straight down the middle. She rode out at dawn on the bay gelding he'd saddled for her without being asked, and Caleb watched her go from the barn doorway with a cup of coffee cooling in his hand and the uneasy feeling of a man who has just let something important out of his sight. He told himself it was practical concern. She didn't know the Northwest terrain. The ground up there was unpredictable after a wet summer, soft in places that looked solid. He should have sent Desmond with her. He should have insisted on going himself and leaving the east fence for later. He told himself all of that, drank the rest of his cold coffee, and went to fix the east fence. She was back before noon. He heard the gelding before he saw her, coming around the far side of the barn at a pace that meant something. He straightened up from the fence post and watched her dismount in the yard. And even from 40 feet away, he could read the tension in her shoulders. "There's a man on your northwest line," she said when she reached him. "Civilian clothes, no badge. He had a surveying rod and a transit level. I watched him for 20 minutes before he saw me." Caleb set down his post driver. "What did he do when he saw you?" "He packed up his equipment very calmly, tipped his hat, and rode north." She handed him the gelding's reins. "He wasn't hiding. He was working like a man who had every right to be there." "He didn't." "I know that, but the way he moved, he's been on that ground before. He knew exactly where he was going. This wasn't a first visit." Caleb felt the cold thing settle in his chest, the one that had been living there since the first letter from Boss's attorneys arrived 18 months ago. He'd described it to no one because there was no one to describe it to. It was the cold of a man who knows something is coming and can't see the shape of it yet. "Did you get a good look at him?" "Brown coat, black hat, gray horse, stocky build, maybe 45. He had a company mark on his saddlebag. I couldn't read the full name, but it started with a V. Voss. Of course it did." "He was surveying my northwest boundary," Caleb said. "He was surveying inside your northwest boundary. Based on your property map, he was at least 80 yards inside your legal line." Nora pulled the notebook from her pocket and opened it to a page covered in measurements and compass bearings that she'd sketched from memory. "I noted the position of his transit against the rock formation at the ridge. I can show you exactly where he was standing." Caleb looked at the notebook page. Then he looked at her. "You carry a compass." "Always." She said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "My father navigated freight routes. I learned compass work at 14. She held his gaze. "Caleb, he's not doing a boundary inquiry anymore. He's building evidence for a disputed survey. If he files a surveyor's report showing that a portion of your land was incorrectly recorded at the original claim, Voss's attorneys have grounds to petition for boundary adjustment, which moves his access to the water table, which gives him the Northern Creek feed. Without it, his mining operation can't expand. With it—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Caleb stood in his own yard on a cold October morning and understood with a clarity that had been missing for 18 months exactly what Gerald Voss was building. Not a purchase, a legal dismemberment. A slow, documented, technically irreproachable theft conducted inside a courthouse instead of at gunpoint. "I need to go to town," he said. "We need to go to town," she said. "And before you tell me to stay here, consider that I know more about the specific legal mechanism he's using than anyone else in Redstone Creek. You'll want me in that conversation." He wanted to argue. He found he couldn't construct one that held up. "Can you be ready in 10 minutes? "I'm already ready," she said. Wade Loomis, the sheriff of Redstone Creek, kept his office at the end of Main Street in a building that had started life as a feed storage room and still smelled like it. He was behind his desk when Caleb and Nora walked in, and his face did the thing faces did when they'd been caught hoping not to be visited. "Caleb." Loomis stood, a formality he didn't always bother with. His eyes moved to Nora. "Ma'am?" "Sheriff." Nora sat down without being invited. "We need to talk about a surveyor working on Mr. Harden's northwest property line this morning. Uninvited and unannounced." Loomis looked at Caleb. "You sure he was on your land?" "She took compass bearings," Caleb said. Loomis blinked. He looked at Nora again, and Caleb could see the man recalibrating in real time, adjusting whatever category he'd initially placed her in. "I documented his position against the ridge formation at the northwest corner," Nora said. She opened the notebook on Loomis's desk without asking. "That formation is 40 yards inside Mr. Harden's recorded boundary. The surveyor was operating approximately 80 yards inside that line. He was carrying a Voss Mining Company saddlebag." Loomis sat back down slowly. Voss has legal counsel. They've filed 2 inquiry requests that were dismissed. Because they were procedurally premature, Nora said. A formal surveyor's report changes that. If Voss files a survey showing a discrepancy between recorded boundaries and physical landmarks, he can petition for judicial review of the original land claim. She paused. Sheriff Loomis, I understand you're in a difficult position. Voss is a significant economic presence in this territory, and taking a stand against his interests has consequences. I'm not asking you to take that stand today. I'm asking you to formally record what I've told you, so that when this reaches a territorial judge, there is documented evidence that this survey was conducted without permission and potentially with fraudulent intent. Loomis stared at her for a long moment. Who are you, exactly? Nora Shaw. I'm going to be Nora Harden shortly. She said it without looking at Caleb, completely matter-of-fact, and Caleb felt the words land in his chest like a stone dropped into still water. My father was Dr. Henry Shaw, who practiced medicine along the Kansas and Colorado frontier for 30 years. I spent a significant portion of my adult life watching men like Gerald Voss use legal machinery to grind smaller people into nothing. I'd rather not watch it happen again. Loomis looked at Caleb. Caleb gave him nothing. The sheriff pulled a ledger from his desk drawer and uncapped his pen. Tell me the exact time and position, he said. They were back on the road home before Loomis had fully absorbed what had just happened, and Caleb drove the first 2 miles in silence, trying to identify the feeling that had settled over him. It wasn't relief. Relief was too simple. It was something more complicated, something that had to do with the specific experience of watching someone walk into a difficult room and know exactly where to stand. You've done that before, he said. Done what? Walked into a room full of men who didn't want you there and made them do what you came for. Nora was quiet for a moment. The road ran through open range, the mountains holding snow at the top now, the sky, the specific shade of blue that Colorado showed off like it knew something the rest of the country didn't. In St. Louis, she said finally, when I found out what Edmund was doing, I went to the county attorney's office with the documents I'd found. I sat in a waiting room for 4 hours before they'd see me. When they finally let me in, the attorney told me that a woman's interpretation of legal filings was not admissible as evidence and suggested I was perhaps confused about what I'd read. She said all of this in the same even tone she used to discuss fence posts and feed schedules. I went home and made a complete copy of every document. Then I went to a rival firm that Edmund had undercut in a previous case, and I showed them what I had, and I explained what it meant, and I asked them what they would do with it if they had standing to act on it. What did they do? They investigated. They found 3 other families Edmund had defrauded using the same template. They built a case. She paused. It wasn't enough to convict him. His family had money and connections and the right judges. But it was enough to end his career in St. Louis and make him leave the city. Another pause, shorter. He's in Chicago now, apparently, doing the same thing. Caleb looked at the road. I'm sorry that happened to you. Are you? She turned to look at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her yet. Not cold, not practical. Just tired in a deep way that went past the 11 hours on the stage. Because most people who say that actually mean they're sorry I brought it up. I mean I'm sorry it happened, not sorry you told me. He kept his eyes forward. There's a difference. She was quiet for long enough that he thought she'd let it go. Then she said, Yes, there is. They didn't speak again until the ranch came into view. But this silence was different from the ones before it. It had lost its edges. Desmond Pike was waiting at the gate when they pulled in, which meant something, because Desmond didn't make social calls and never arrived without reason. He was leaning on the fence post, with his hat pushed back, and the particular expression he wore when he'd heard something he didn't want to have to repeat. "Des," Caleb said, climbing down. "What is it?" "Got a visit this morning. Man from Denver. Gerald Voss himself, not his lawyers." Desmond looked at the ground, then back up. "He came to my place first, asked if I knew your situation, asked if I'd be interested in a cooperative land arrangement with a mining company looking to develop water access in this valley." Desmond spat in the dirt. "I told him I wasn't interested. He smiled and said he understood, and that he was sure things would work out one way or another." "What does that mean?" Nora said. Desmond looked at her. He'd met her for the first time 2 days ago, and had said exactly 7 words to her in that encounter. Now he looked at her with the particular attention of a man reassessing, and said, "I think it means he's moving faster than he planned." "Why would he move faster?" "Because somebody filed a report at the county office this morning, before you got there." Desmond pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Jake Pruitt brought this out. His cousin works the county desk. Said a man came in first thing and filed a formal surveyor's report, claiming a boundary discrepancy on Harden land." He held the paper out to Caleb. "It was filed at 8:15, before any of us were awake and thinking." Caleb took the paper. He read it once, read it again. The language was identical to what Nora had described from the St. Louis filings. The specific framework, the precise legal vocabulary of a template used more than once. He handed it to Nora without a word. She read it standing in the yard in the cold afternoon light. Her expression didn't change, but he watched her jaw tighten in that small, controlled way he was already learning to recognize. "He had this ready," she said. "He was waiting for a moment to file it. The surveyor this morning was the final piece. He needed a field report to attach to the petition." She looked up. "He's asking for judicial review of your original land claim. The hearing will be scheduled within 60 days. 60 days, Caleb said. "If we don't respond with a counter-documentation by then, the review proceeds without opposition." She folded the paper carefully and handed it back. "We need a land attorney. Not from Redstone Creek, from Denver or Colorado Springs. Someone outside Voss's immediate reach." "I can't afford a Denver attorney." "You can't afford to lose your water access either." She met his eyes directly. No softness, no evasion. "How much do you have in reserve?" He almost said that was none of her business. He looked at her face and decided against it. "Enough for a hard winter and not much beyond it." She nodded slowly, absorbing that without visible reaction. Then she turned to Desmond. "The other ranches in this valley, how many of them are dealing with similar pressure from Voss?" Desmond scratched the back of his neck. "Heard the Aldrich family got a purchase offer they didn't ask for last spring. The Beaumont place had some fence troubles nobody could explain. Old man Garrett lost 20 head he blamed on mountain cats, but the timing was strange." "It's never one family," Nora said, and there was something in her voice that wasn't anger exactly, but was the thing that came just before anger in a person who'd learned to keep anger useful. "It's never isolated. Men like Voss don't take on one opponent. They pressure the whole landscape simultaneously, so everyone thinks they're alone." Desmond looked at Caleb. "She always talk like this?" "She's been here 3 days, Caleb said. "Yes." Desmond almost smiled. "I'll ride out to the Aldrich place tomorrow. Talk to Bill. He's a quiet man, but he's stubborn. If he knows he's not standing alone..." "Don't tell him everything yet," Nora said. "Don't give him details that could get back to Voss through loose talk. Just ask him what he's experienced, and listen. Let him talk first." She paused. "Can you do that?" "I've been listening to ranchers talk for 30 years, Desmond said. "Reckon I can manage." After Desmond rode out, they stood in the yard in the early dark, the mountains going black against a sky still pale in the west, And Caleb looked at the paper in his hand and felt the weight of 7 years of building something that was now being methodically surrounded by a man with lawyers and money and no particular conscience. "I need you to understand something," he said. Nora waited. "I've been fighting this alone because I didn't think I had any other choice. And I've been losing. Slowly, without making noise, but losing." He folded the paper, the same careful way she'd folded it. "I don't know how to do what you're doing. This thinking 3 steps ahead, this knowing the legal language, this walking into a sheriff's office and making a man do his job." He looked at her. "I don't know how to do that." "I know," she said. No comfort in it, no condescension, just a fact. "So why are you still here?" The question came out quieter than he intended. It wasn't accusatory. It was the real question, the one that had been sitting at the back of his skull since the moment she'd walked into his kitchen at dawn with a notebook and a map and the settled air of someone who'd made a decision and wasn't revisiting it. Nora looked at him for a long moment. The wind moved between them, cold off the high peaks, carrying the smell of coming snow. "Because this is a problem I know how to fight," she said. "And I'm tired of walking away from things I know how to fight." She held his gaze. "And because you asked for plain and practical, and someone without complications. And what you actually need is someone who understands exactly the kind of trouble you're in." She paused. "I'm not what you asked for, but I might be what you need. Those aren't always the same thing." Caleb Harden stood in the dark in the yard of the ranch he'd built out of loss and stubbornness and 7 years of refusing to quit, and looked at the woman who'd been here 3 days and had already seen more of his situation than he'd let anyone see in 7 years, and felt that wall crack a little further. He didn't say anything. He didn't have words for it yet. But he didn't look away either. "Snow's coming," Nora said, looking at the sky. "By morning." "Then we'd better get the horses in." She turned toward the barn. "I'll take the gelding. You get the mare, and tomorrow we ride to the Aldrich place together. You'll need someone there who's heard Voss's arguments before." He watched her walk toward the barn, straight-backed and certain in the early dark of a Colorado night, and thought for the first time in 7 years that maybe the worst thing that could have happened to him had just become something else entirely. He didn't know what yet, but the shape of it was changing. He went to get the mare. The snow came in the night, the way trouble always did. Quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. Caleb was up before it stopped falling, standing at the window with coffee he'd made by feel in the dark, watching the yard go white and still under 3 inches of early October snow that hadn't been in any forecast and didn't care. By the time Nora appeared from the bedroom, dressed and pinning her hair back with the efficient movements of someone who'd been waking up to difficult mornings her whole life, he had the stove going and the horses already checked. "How are the cattle?" she asked. "Moved the main herd to the south pasture last night before dark. They've got the windbreak." "The Aldrich place is going to be slow going in this." "I know." He set a cup on the table for her. "We still go." She picked it up without sitting down. "I wasn't suggesting otherwise." They rode out at 7. The world was white and hushed and cold enough to hurt, and the trail to the Aldrich ranch followed a creek bed that had gone slick and treacherous under the snow. Caleb took it slow. Nora rode beside him without complaint, reading the ground the way she read everything, carefully, without drama. Bill Aldrich was a lean, weathered man in his mid-50s who'd built his spread 20 years ago and wore the expression of someone who'd survived enough hard seasons to stop being surprised by them. He came to his door with a rifle that he immediately lowered when he recognized Caleb, and then looked at Nora with the careful assessment of a man who'd been alone long enough to be suspicious of the unexpected. "Bill," Caleb said, "this is Nora Shaw. She's with me." It was the first time he'd said anything like that out loud. The pause before it was shorter than he expected. Bill Aldrich looked at Nora for a long 3 seconds. "You're the woman from the stage," he said. "I am." "People in town are talking about you." "People in town talk about everything." She met his eyes without flinching. "I'm more interested in what's happening on your land, Mr. Aldrich. Desmond Pike tells me you've had some difficulties." Bill looked at Caleb. Caleb gave him a small nod. "Come inside," Bill said. The next hour was one of the most important hours Caleb had spent in 7 years. And he spent most of it watching Nora listen. She didn't lead. She didn't correct. She asked one question at a time and let Bill Aldrich tell his story in the order it lived in his memory, which was not chronological and not always logical, but was completely honest. And by the end of it, she had 4 pages of notes, and Bill Aldrich had the careful, slightly dazed look of a man who'd been carrying a heavy thing for a long time and had just set it down for the first time. "It's not just me," Bill said. It wasn't a question. He'd been building to it since the second page. "It's not just you," Nora confirmed. "It's you and Caleb and the Beaumont place and likely the Garrett Ranch. Possibly 2 more we haven't spoken to yet." She turned the notebook so he could see the timeline she'd built while he talked. "Look at the dates. Every incident happens on a rotating pattern, never the same property twice in a row, designed to make each of you feel isolated and unlucky." Bill stared at the page. "Son of a—" He stopped himself, looked at Nora. "Beg your pardon, ma'am." "I've heard worse." She tapped the notebook. "The purchase offer you received in the spring. Do you still have that letter?" "Somewhere." "Find it. I need the language it used." She looked at Caleb. "If it matches the template from Caleb's filings and the Edmund Cross documents I have copies of in my medical bag." She said it without elaborating on Edmund, without explaining, without making it about her. "Then we have evidence of a coordinated legal scheme conducted across state lines. That's federal jurisdiction." Bill Aldrich sat back in his chair and looked at this woman who'd arrived in his kitchen out of the snow with a notebook and compass readings, and the quiet authority of someone who'd been fighting this particular kind of war since before it showed up in Colorado. "Where'd you come from?" he asked. "Kansas City most recently," Nora said. "Before that, everywhere." They left the Aldrich place with the purchase letter, 2 other documents Bill found in a box under his bed, and a handshake agreement that Bill Aldrich would ride to the Beaumont and Garrett ranches that week and ask the same quiet questions Nora had asked him. On the ride home, the snow had softened into something almost gentle, and the trail along the creek opened up enough that they could ride side by side. "You didn't tell him about Edmund," Caleb said. "It wasn't relevant to him." "It was relevant to where your knowledge comes from." "My knowledge comes from 10 years of watching and learning." She kept her eyes on the trail. "Edmund didn't give me that. He just gave me a specific example that confirmed what I already understood." A pause. "I don't define myself by what happened in St. Louis. I define myself by what I did about it." Caleb rode for a moment with that. Then he said, "What did you do about it?" "I already told you. You told me you went to his competitors. You told me it wasn't enough to convict him." He looked at her. "I'm asking what you did for yourself. After." She was quiet long enough that he thought he'd overstepped. Then she said, "I packed everything I owned into a trunk and moved out of my aunt's house and found a room at a boarding house on the south side of the city and spent 3 months reading every land law statute I could find in the county library." Her voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. "And then I answered the agency's notice because I was done with cities and men in suits and rooms where no one ever said what they actually meant." She glanced at him. Your letter said plain and practical, no complications. It sounded like someone who meant what he wrote. I did mean it. I know. She almost smiled. That's why I chose it. They were half a mile from the ranch when Caleb saw the riders. 3 of them stopped on the rise above the north pasture, watching the property from just far enough away to claim they were on the public road. The gray horse in the middle was the same gray horse Nora had described from the northwest boundary that morning. Caleb pulled his horse to a stop. I see them, Nora said quietly. The one in the middle worked for Voss. I recognize the horse. They're not hiding. Her voice had gone to the calm, flat tone he'd learned meant she was thinking fast beneath a very still surface. They want you to see them. They want you to know they're watching. Intimidation. Establishment of presence. It's the step before actual intimidation. She didn't reach for anything, didn't change her posture. Don't react. Keep riding at the same pace. If you stop or turn toward them, you give them what they came for. And if I want to ride up there and ask them their business on my land, then you give Voss's lawyers documentation that you confronted his employees unprovoked. She looked at him with a directness that he'd stopped finding startling somewhere around day 2. I know it goes against every instinct you have. I know what it feels like to see the problem right in front of you and be told to walk past it. A beat. Walk past it. He rode past it. It was one of the harder things he'd done recently, and he'd had a hard year. The riders watched them go without moving, and that stillness was its own kind of statement, and Caleb felt it between his shoulder blades all the way to the barn. That evening, Desmond came back. He sat at the kitchen table with his hat on his knee and the expression he'd been wearing a lot lately, the one that meant news he didn't want to carry. Talked to 3 people in town today, Desmond said. Bill's story is spreading. People are starting to understand what Voss is doing. He turned his hat in his hands. And Voss knows they're understanding it. His man, Jake Pruitt, was in the saloon tonight, telling anyone who'd listen that Caleb Harden's new woman is a con artist from Missouri, who talks law she doesn't know and is going to get the whole valley in trouble by provoking a company that could build or destroy half the commerce in this county. The room went quiet. Nora set down her pen. She didn't look up immediately. When she did, her face was composed in a way that Caleb recognized now as the thing she did when something hit a place that was genuinely tender. Who was listening? She asked. Some. Not everybody. Desmond looked at her steadily. Ruth Calloway told Pruitt to take his opinion somewhere else. That's something. The ones who listened, Nora said. Will they talk to their neighbors? Probably. Then by tomorrow, half the valley will have heard I'm a fraud before they've heard anything else. She said it without self-pity, just calculation. Voss is smart. He's not going after the land argument first. He's going after the person making the argument. That's my read too, Desmond said. Caleb looked at her. She had her hands flat on the table in front of her, and he could see the small tension in them, controlled and contained. Nora. She looked up. Is there anything in your history in St. Louis that he could use? He kept his voice even. I'm not asking to judge it. I'm asking so we're not surprised. She held his gaze for a long moment. Edmund's family filed a defamation complaint against me when I went to his competitors. It was dismissed inside of 2 weeks because I had documentation. But the filing exists. It's public record. She paused. A man like Voss, with the right connections, could find that and make it look like something it isn't. Could he make it stick? To a judge? No. To the people of Redstone Creek who don't know me yet? Her jaw tightened. Possibly. Desmond stood, put his hat back on. I'll ride out to the Beaumont place first thing. Get their story documented before Pruitt's version has time to settle. He looked at Caleb. You trust her. It wasn't quite a question. Yes, Caleb said. He said it before he'd finished deciding to say it, which was, he was learning, how he said the things he actually meant. Desmond nodded once. Then that's enough for me. He went to the door. Watch your north line tonight. Those riders don't come out in snow for sightseeing. After Desmond left, neither of them spoke for a moment. The fire moved in the stove. Outside, the snow was starting again, softer this time. You didn't have to say that, Nora said. I know. You barely know me. I know what I've watched you do in 4 days. He turned from the window. I know that you found a survey trespasser before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. I know you walked into Loomis's office and made him open a ledger he'd been keeping closed for 6 months. I know you sat in Bill Aldrich's kitchen and listened to him for an hour without once making him feel stupid for being afraid. He held her gaze. That's enough to know. Nora looked at him with the dark eyes that took inventory of everything, and for the first time since he'd met her, she didn't seem to know what to say. Caleb. Her voice was different. Not the practical voice, or the legal voice, or the steady frontier voice. Something underneath all of those. I need you to understand something about why I'm telling you this now. Tell me. I've been in situations where I trusted the wrong person, where I believed what someone showed me instead of what they were. She looked at her hands. I'm very careful now about what I let myself believe. Not because I'm afraid of being wrong, but because I know what it costs. She looked up. I'm not going to pretend I don't know that something is happening between us. I'm not built for pretending. But I need to know that you see me, not the solution to your land problem, not someone to run your books. Me. The fire crackled. The snow came down outside. I see you, Caleb said. And then, because he was a man who'd spent 7 years being careful and was learning what that caution had cost him, he said the rest of it. I see someone who came to a strange territory to help a stranger and found a fight she didn't sign up for and didn't leave. I see someone who makes me feel... He stopped, started again. I haven't felt like my own best judgment in 7 years. Since Margaret. Since Daniel. His son's name, which he hadn't said aloud to anyone in 2 years, came out quiet and rough. I wake up thinking like myself again, and I don't know how to account for that. Except you. Nora didn't move for a long moment. Then she crossed the kitchen and stood in front of him and put her hand flat on his chest, right over the place where that cold thing had lived for 7 years, and looked up at him with those steady, dark eyes. I'm not leaving, she said. Not because of Voss, not because of whatever Pruitt is saying in town, not because this is hard. A breath. But I need you to trust me, the way I'm trusting you. All the way. Not halfway, not provisionally. All the way. I know, he said. Do you? He put his hand over hers. I'm learning. She held his gaze for one more searching second. Then she stepped back, practical again, present again, but different in a way that was now between them and couldn't be taken back. Get some sleep, she said. Tomorrow is going to be complicated. He almost asked how she knew. Then he remembered she'd been saying that every night and being right every morning. And he went to bed without asking. At 2 a.m, the north fence went down. He heard the cattle before he heard anything else. That particular sound of a herd in confused motion, not panicked, but displaced, moving wrong in the dark. He was dressed and out the door in under a minute. Nora was right behind him. They rode the north line in the dark with lanterns, following the sound, and found the break a quarter-mile up. Wire cut clean and clean again. 6 posts pulled loose. A gap wide enough to drive a wagon through. The tracks in the snow led north. At least 4 horses, moving fast, not hiding the direction. 30 head gone. Caleb stood at the break with his lantern and his fists, and the particular quality of rage that comes from seeing something you've built being taken apart, piece by piece, by someone who knows you can't afford to replace it. "Don't," Nora said behind him. "Don't what?" "Don't ride north. That's exactly what they want." "Nora." "Caleb." She stepped forward until she was beside him, her lantern throwing both their shadows long across the snow. "I know what this feels like. I know the feeling of watching something be taken and knowing exactly who took it and not being able to move directly." Her voice was iron, and it was also something else, something that understood from the inside. "But if you ride onto Voss's range in the middle of the night, his men put you in the ground and claim defense. Everything we've built in 4 days dies with you." He stood in the snow with the cold and the rage and 30 missing cattle and the broken fence and listened to the woman beside him breathe. "Then what do we do?" he said. "First light, we go to Loomis with the tracks and the compass readings and the timeline. We add it to the record." She turned to face him fully. "And then we go get your cattle back, the way that actually makes Voss pay for them. In court, in front of a judge, in a record that follows him for the rest of his life." "That takes time." "Yes." "I don't have time. I don't have the cattle. I don't have the money to—" "I know." She put her hand on his arm, firm and grounding. "I know what you have and what you don't. I've been running the numbers since day 1. She held his gaze in the dark. "Trust me." He looked at her, this woman who'd been here 4 days and was standing in his snow in the middle of the night like she'd been standing in it her whole life. "All right," he said. They rode back to the house in the dark, with the missing cattle behind them and the long, complicated, dangerous work of what came next ahead of them. And Caleb Harden, who'd spent 7 years building walls against exactly this kind of dependence, felt the last of the first wall come down in the cold Colorado night, and didn't reach to hold it up. They were at Loomis's office before the sheriff had finished his first cup of coffee. Nora laid the compass readings on his desk, alongside the timeline she'd built overnight. 4 hours of work by lamplight, while Caleb repaired what he could of the north fence in the dark. The timeline showed every incident in chronological order across 5 ranches, with dates, descriptions, and the pattern that connected them. She'd written it in the clear, precise hand of someone who understood that a document is only useful if the person reading it can't misunderstand it. Loomis read it without speaking. He read it twice. Then he sat back and looked at the ceiling for a long moment, like a man having a private argument with himself. "Wade," Caleb said, "I've got 30 head gone and tracks that lead straight north. I've got a broken fence line that matches the 2 previous breaks on my property. I've got Nora's compass documentation putting Voss's surveyor inside my boundary line 2 days ago." He leaned forward. "I need you to do your job." "Caleb, I need you to do your job today. Not when it's convenient. Not when Voss's lawyers have had time to build a counter-narrative." He held the sheriff's gaze. "Today." Loomis looked at Nora. "You're sure about the tracks?" "I documented them at 2:15 this morning with a lantern and a compass and measurements against a fixed fence post." She held his gaze without blinking. "I'm sure." Another long silence. "If I ride out to Voss's range looking for those cattle," Loomis said slowly, "and they're there, I'm starting something I can't stop." "They're already started," Nora said. Voss started it 18 months ago. You're not starting anything. You're responding to it." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter, but no less firm. "Sheriff Loomis, I know you're tired. I know you've been watching this valley change and feeling like you can't hold it together. I know Voss represents money and development and things that look like progress from a certain angle." She leaned forward. "But there is no version of this that ends well for Redstone Creek if you don't act now. The ranchers in this valley are the backbone of this community. When Voss controls the water access, he controls every one of them. And men who control water in this territory don't stop there." Loomis stared at his desk. "My deputy's out sick," he said finally. "Desmond Pike will ride with you," Caleb said. "And Bill Aldrich. And me." "And me," Nora said. Both men looked at her. "I have documented evidence of the track pattern, the compass readings, and the timeline that ties this incident to the larger scheme. If you find those cattle and it goes to a judge, you want the person who built that case present and available to testify." She looked at Loomis. "Unless you'd rather explain to the territorial court why you left your primary witness at home." Loomis picked up his hat. They rode out 4 strong: Caleb, Nora, Loomis, and Desmond, who'd appeared at the ranch at dawn with his rifle across his saddle and the look of a man who'd decided something in the night and was done revisiting it. Bill Aldrich met them at the north fence line with 2 of his ranch hands, and the expression on his face when he saw the clean-cut wire and pulled posts was the expression of a man recognizing something he'd tried to convince himself wasn't real. "Same tool marks," Nora said, crouching at the cut wire. "Same compression pattern at the break point. Consistent with the tool used at the 2 previous fence cuts on this property, and the 3 documented cuts at the Aldridge Ranch." She looked up at Loomis. "I want that noted." "Noted," Loomis said, and he was writing in his own ledger now, which meant something. They followed the tracks north for 2 hours, past the boundary of Caleb's land, and into the open range that bordered Voss's northern holdings. The trail was clear in the snow, 30 head of cattle driven fast, the prints of 4 horses pressing them along. Whoever had done this hadn't worried about being followed. That was the first thing that bothered Caleb. The second thing was the silence when they crested the ridge above Voss's northern pasture and looked down. The cattle were there, all 30 head, penned in a makeshift enclosure near a line shack that was too new and too well built to be accidental. 2 men stood guard, and 50 yards back, at the entrance to a narrow canyon that opened onto Voss's main range, 3 more men sat on horses and watched the ridge with the patient stillness of people who had been expecting company. "It's a trap," Caleb said. "Yes," Nora said. She said it without surprise, without panic, with the tone of someone who'd already calculated this possibility and was 2 steps past it. "But it's also an opportunity." Loomis looked at her. "How in the hell is this an opportunity?" "Because those cattle are on Voss's land in plain sight of a sheriff and 3 witnesses. They haven't been rebranded yet. We're less than 12 hours out. There wasn't time." She scanned the layout below without turning her head. "And because the men waiting for us to come charging down that hill are planning to claim that Caleb drove his own cattle onto Voss's land, looking for a confrontation. That's the narrative Voss's lawyers will use." She paused. "Which means we don't go down that hill. Not the way they expect." "Then how?" Desmond said. "Sheriff Loomis goes down alone. Badge visible, no weapons raised. He identifies himself, states that he's investigating a theft report, documents the brands, demands the men stand aside. He does it by the book, every step witnessed by the 4 of us up here." She looked at Loomis. "If they let you through, you document everything. If they refuse to let law enforcement access to investigate a theft, that refusal is itself a crime. Either way, you walk out with what we need." "And if they shoot at me," Loomis said flatly, "then they've committed attempted murder of a law officer in front of witnesses. And this goes federal this afternoon, instead of next month." She held his gaze. "They won't shoot you. Voss is meticulous. He doesn't do anything that can't be explained away. Shooting a sheriff can't be explained away." Caleb watched Loomis work through it. Watched the man's face move from resistance through reluctant logic to the heavy acceptance of someone who'd run out of reasons to say no. "If this goes wrong," Loomis said. "It won't," Nora said. "You sound very sure of that for someone who's been in this valley 5 days." "I've been watching men like Voss operate for 3 years. Her voice didn't waver. "I know how they think. I know where they stop." A pause. "He doesn't think you'll do this. He thinks you're as intimidated as you've been for the last 18 months. Prove him wrong." Wade Loomis looked at Caleb one more time. Caleb gave him a single nod. The sheriff rode down the hill alone, badge catching the cold morning light, and the 4 of them on the ridge watched without moving or speaking, while below, the confrontation played out in the careful, measured language of a man doing his job properly for the first time in too long. The men at the canyon mouth didn't move. The guards at the enclosure let Loomis through after a long hesitation and what appeared to be a tense exchange. He rode to the cattle, dismounted, checked brands, wrote in his ledger. He did it slowly. He did it completely. When he was done, he rode back past the guards and up the hill, and his face was different than when he'd gone down. "All 30, he said. "Brands unaltered, consistent with Harden's registry." He looked at Caleb. "I've documented it." "Can you compel their return?" Nora asked. "On a documented theft, with verified brands and a witness trail?" Loomis almost smiled. "Yeah, I can do that." "Then do it today," she said, "before Voss's lawyers file anything this afternoon." Gerald Voss appeared in Redstone Creek 2 hours later. Caleb was in the street outside the sheriff's office when the carriage arrived. A Denver-built coach that was too expensive for the road it was traveling, which was exactly the kind of statement it was meant to be. Voss stepped out with the unhurried confidence of a man who owned most of the chairs he was ever asked to sit in, dressed in a coat that cost more than Caleb's monthly feed bill, and looked at the street with the patient, slightly amused expression of someone watching a chessboard from a position of overwhelming advantage. He was shorter than Caleb expected. Caleb wasn't sure why that surprised him. Voss saw Caleb immediately and walked toward him with his hand extended like they were old acquaintances at a county fair. "Mr. Harden," he said. His voice was warm. That was the first thing that made Caleb's stomach tighten. The absolute ease of the warmth, practiced and deployed like a tool. "I've been hoping we'd have the chance to speak directly." Caleb didn't take the hand. "Mr. Voss." Voss let the hand drop without any visible reaction. "I understand there's been some confusion about livestock this morning. I want you to know that whatever happened, it was without my knowledge or authorization. I've already spoken to the men responsible. It won't happen again." "The men responsible," Caleb said. "Who were they?" "Contracted laborers, not employees of the company. Their behavior was unacceptable, and they've been released." "Convenient," Voss smiled. "Mr. Harden, I've been trying to establish a productive relationship with the ranchers in this valley for over a year. I've been met with suspicion and resistance at every turn. I understand the concern about outside development. Do you?" "I do." The warmth didn't shift. "Which is why I'd very much like to sit down with you and discuss what a partnership arrangement might look like. One that protects your land rights while allowing the development that could bring real economic benefit to this community." "Mr. Voss." It was Nora's voice, and it came from behind Caleb's right shoulder, and it had the particular quality it got when she'd heard enough. Voss looked at her. Something moved through his expression. Not quite surprise, more like recalibration. The reassessment of a man who'd received intelligence about a person and is now comparing it to the actual person in front of him. "You must be Miss Shaw," he said. "Mrs. Harden," she said. "Or close enough that the distinction doesn't matter for this conversation." Voss looked at Caleb, back at Nora. "I heard you'd come to assist Mr. Harden with some legal questions. I understand you have some background in property law?" "I have background in how men like you use property law." She stepped forward, so she was standing beside Caleb rather than behind him. "I've read your filings, Mr. Voss, both of them. I've read the surveyor's report you filed 3 days ago. I've read the 2 preliminary inquiries that preceded it." She held his gaze with complete steadiness. "And I've read 6 filings from Jefferson County, Missouri, where the identical legal template was used in 1874 and 1875 against 4 farming families, 3 of whom sold under duress, 1 of whom fought it and won when a federal circuit court ruled the boundary survey methodology fraudulent." Something shifted in Voss's expression. Barely. But Caleb saw it, and he thought Nora saw it too, because her next words came harder. "I know which case established that precedent," she said. "I know which judge wrote the ruling. I know which attorney argued the winning side. And I know that he is currently practicing in Colorado Springs." She paused. "Which is where I sent a wire this morning." The street was very quiet. "You're a resourceful woman," Voss said. The warmth was still there, but it had developed a sharp edge beneath it. "I'm a woman who knows what you're doing and how to stop it." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Your surveyor's report will be challenged on methodology by an attorney who has successfully argued this exact issue before a federal circuit. Your boundary claim will be compared against the Jefferson County precedent. Your history of filing identical documents across multiple jurisdictions will be entered into the territorial record." She let that settle. "You can still walk away from this, Mr. Voss. Take your survey and your cattle operation and find water access somewhere that doesn't require destroying 5 families who built this valley with their own hands. You'll save your company considerable legal expense and a significant amount of unwanted federal attention." Voss looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Caleb. "You're letting a woman you've known for less than a week dictate your legal strategy." "I'm listening to someone who's right," Caleb said. "That's a very romantic position," Voss said. "It's also a very expensive one." The warmth had gone entirely now. What was underneath it was not rage. Men like Voss didn't do rage, Caleb was learning, but a kind of cold, patient certainty. "I've been in this territory for 2 years, Mr. Harden. I have relationships with territorial judges, county surveyors, and commercial interests in every town between here and Denver. Whatever your," he glanced at Nora, "associate wired to Colorado Springs this morning will not arrive before my attorneys file their response to the sheriff's interference today. And once that process is moving, it has a momentum that one rural rancher and one clever woman are not going to stop." He said it without heat. That was what made it land. He got back in his carriage. Caleb stood in the street and watched it roll away and felt the cold thing in his chest come back, wider than before. "He's right," he said. His voice came out flat. "About the momentum, about the connections. We bought time this morning, Nora, but—" "Caleb." She turned to face him. Her voice was steady. "Look at me." He looked at her. "Do you remember what I told you about the family in Jefferson County? The one that fought the survey claim and won?" "Yes." "The reason they won wasn't because they had more money or more connections than the company that came after them." She held his gaze. "They won because they got to the federal circuit before the company had time to bury the case in territorial procedures. They won because they moved fast, and they moved with documentation that couldn't be reinterpreted." She put her hand on his arm. We have that documentation. We have Loomis's record from this morning. We have the survey trespass I documented 3 days ago. We have the timeline I built last night that covers 5 ranches over 6 months. She let that sit. What we need is one more thing. What? We need someone on Voss's payroll who's scared enough to talk. Desmond spoke from behind them. The 2 men they threw under the carriage this morning, he said. The ones Voss just called contracted laborers and released. Nora turned. Men like that, Desmond said slowly, who've just been cut loose by a rich man who told them their behavior was unacceptable. They're sitting somewhere right now, realizing they've been made into evidence that disappears when it's convenient. He looked at Nora. That's a man with something to say. Do you know who they are? She asked. I know one of them, Tommy Reeves. Grew up in this valley. His mother still lives here. Desmond paused. He's not a bad man. Got himself mixed up in Voss's operation because the money was good and he didn't ask enough questions. Where would he go? Nora said. Not a question, a direction. His mother's place is 3 miles east. Nora looked at Caleb. Go, he said. She and Desmond rode for Tommy Reeves's mother's place, and Caleb went inside and sat down at the rough kitchen table and put his head in his hands for just a moment. Not in defeat, but in the private exhaustion of a man who has been holding a great weight for a very long time, and has finally found someone to hold it with him. It was that thought that surprised him most. Not the fear, not the anger, the relief. He'd been alone in this for so long that the simple fact of having someone who understood the terrain, who moved through the difficulty without flinching, who looked at Gerald Voss in a public street and told him exactly what she knew and what she planned to do about it, the simple fact of that was almost more than he could process. He thought about Margaret, about standing in this kitchen 7 years ago, watching her face close down like a window being shuttered, about the specific way she'd said, I can't live like this. Not as accusation, just fact. She hadn't been wrong about herself. She'd been wrong to come in the first place, and he'd been wrong to think want was the same as suited for. He didn't think Nora Shaw was wrong to be here. He thought she might be the only person who'd ever been exactly right to be here, and he didn't know what to do with that yet, except to not waste it. They came back 2 hours later with Tommy Reeves sitting between them on a borrowed horse, pale and thin-faced, and carrying the look of a young man who'd made a series of decisions that all seemed reasonable at the time and had arrived somewhere he didn't recognize. He'll testify, Nora said, dismounting in the yard. He can put Voss's foreman at the fence line the night of the first cut, 8 months ago. He can put 3 of Voss's named employees at the Beaumont incident. And he can testify that Voss himself gave the order for the cattle theft 2 nights ago, in a direct conversation that Tommy was present for. Her voice was controlled, but something beneath it was alive and certain. He heard it. He can repeat it word for word. Caleb looked at Tommy Reeves. The young man met his eyes with the particular expression of someone stepping off a ledge and not knowing yet if the ground was close or far. Mr. Harden, he said, I'm sorry for what we did to your place. I know, Caleb said. And then, because it was true, thank you. Tommy nodded. His jaw worked. Mr. Voss said we were just moving cattle. Said it was a negotiating tactic. Said nobody would get hurt. He looked at his hands. He's been saying that for 8 months, and people keep getting hurt. Will you say all of that to a federal judge? Nora asked. Yes, ma'am. She looked at Caleb. Then we wire Colorado Springs tonight. The attorney I contacted this morning will want to know we have a direct witness to Voss's orders. That changes the filing from a land dispute to criminal conspiracy. She held his gaze with the steady, certain look he'd come to understand meant she'd thought it through and was sure. It's over, Caleb. Not today, and not without more fight. But the outcome is decided. Caleb Harden looked at this woman in his yard, this woman who'd arrived 5 days ago on a stagecoach with a trunk and a medical bag and a notebook and a compass, and the kind of fierce, relentless, practical love for justice that he hadn't known existed outside of stories, and felt the last remnant of the cold thing in his chest dissolve like snow in warm water. "Nora," he said. "Yes." "When this is over," he stopped, started again because he was done doing things halfway. "When this is over, I want you to stay. Not because you're useful, not because the ranch needs 2 people, because I can't imagine waking up to this place without you in it anymore. And it's only been 5 days. And I know that doesn't make sense, but I'm done waiting for things to make sense before I say them." She was very still. "I'm not finished being scared," he said. "I'm not saying I've got it figured out. I'm saying I want to figure it out with you, and I'm asking you to let me." Nora Shaw stood in the yard of the ranch she'd ridden onto 5 days ago as a stranger and looked at the man in front of her. Scarred and stubborn and honest, in the way that only people who'd been broken and rebuilt were honest, and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't known was still held tight. "I already told you I'm not leaving," she said. "I know. I'm asking for more than that." A long moment. Then the corner of her mouth moved. Then asked properly. He almost smiled. It was the most he'd smiled in years. "Nora Shaw," he said. "Stay." "Yes," she said. And it was the most uncomplicated word either of them had said in 5 days, and it landed like something settled and solid and permanent between them. Tommy Reeves looked at his boots. Desmond studied the mountains with great interest. The wire to Colorado Springs went out that evening, and the answer came back before midnight. And the attorney's name was Harlan Cole, and he was taking the next morning stage. Harlan Cole stepped off the morning stage looking like a man who'd slept in his coat and didn't care, which immediately made Caleb trust him more than any attorney he'd ever met. He was 60, maybe 65, with a face that had been weathered by 30 years of territorial courtrooms and didn't apologize for it. He carried one bag and a leather case so worn at the corners it had probably seen 3 territories and 2 wars. And he shook Caleb's hand with the grip of someone who'd learned that a handshake told you most of what you needed to know about a person. Then he looked at Nora and said, "You're the one who wired me." "I am." "You cited the Whitmore ruling in your wire." "It was directly applicable." He studied her for a moment, the way a man studies a card hand he hadn't expected. "How do you know the Whitmore ruling?" "I read the transcript. Twice." She handed him the folder she'd been carrying since before dawn. The full timeline, the compass documentation, Loomis's filed report, Tommy Reeves's written statement, and the copies of Voss's filings with the identical template language, marked and annotated in her precise hand. "I've also cross-referenced Voss's survey methodology against the methodology the circuit court ruled fraudulent in Whitmore. The variance calculation is identical to within a margin of 2%. Cole opened the folder and read standing in the street outside the stage depot, and nobody said anything while he did it. Ruth Calloway had come out of her store to watch and was pretending she hadn't. Desmond stood with his arms crossed and the expression of a man watching something historic that he wasn't entirely sure how to categorize. Cole closed the folder. "Who taught you property law?" he said to Nora. "No one. I taught myself." "Why?" "Because someone had to." She held his gaze. "Will you take the case?" "I took it when you cited Whitmore in a telegram from a cattle town." He tucked the folder under his arm. "Now, take me somewhere with coffee and tell me about this Tommy Reeves." The next 4 days moved with the focused, slightly airless quality of time that matters. Every hour purposeful, every conversation carrying weight. Cole worked from Ruth Calloway's back room, which Ruth offered without being asked and refused to be thanked for. And Nora worked beside him. And Caleb watched the two of them build a case with the methodical precision of people who understood that a single loose thread could unravel everything. Tommy Reeves gave his statement on the second day, formal and witnessed and notarized by the county clerk, who had the look of a man who'd spent years being the last to know things and was processing the experience of being the first. Tommy's voice shook in the first 10 minutes and then steadied, and by the end of it, he'd placed Gerald Voss in direct command of every major incident over 8 months, named 4 employees by name, and described a conversation in Voss's private office in which the water access strategy had been outlined with a kind of clarity that only happens when a man is so certain of his power that he stops being careful. He said the ranchers would fold, Tommy told Cole quietly. Said they always did. Said the ones who didn't fold eventually ran out of money, and it amounted to the same thing. He looked at his hands. He said it like he was talking about weather, like it wasn't even people he was discussing. Cole wrote it all down. Nora wrote it all down. They compared versions and reconciled every discrepancy until the statement was airtight. On the third day, Voss's attorneys filed an injunction to block Loomis's cattle recovery order, and the coldness came back into the room for about 2 hours, until Cole read the filing, made 3 notes in the margin, and looked up and said, "This is premised on the boundary survey being valid. We've already got the Whitmore precedent establishing that methodology as fraudulent. This injunction defeats itself." He tapped the page. "We respond tomorrow morning, and it's done." Nora and Caleb were alone in the kitchen that night when the weight of the last week finally settled over the room like the snow had settled over the yard. Quiet and total. "You should sleep," Caleb said. "I will." She was at the table with the notebook open, but not writing, which was the first time he'd seen her sit with an open notebook and not be writing. "I keep thinking about the survey filing, the procedural sequence, whether there's anything we've left." "Nora," she looked up. "You've done everything," he said. "Cole said it this morning. You know what he said." "He said the case was solid." "He said he'd never seen a case this well documented by someone without a law degree. And Cole doesn't say things like that to make people feel good." Caleb sat down across from her. "Let yourself believe it's going to work." She looked at him with the dark eyes that saw everything. "I'm not good at that," she said, "at believing things before they're certain." "I know." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. "Neither am I. We can be bad at it together." Something in her face shifted. Not a big shift, but the particular kind that means something has moved in a place that doesn't move easily. "I love you," she said. She said it the same way she said everything, directly, without preamble, without decorating it. "I didn't plan to say that tonight. I don't have a plan for it at all. But I've been thinking it for 3 days, and I'm tired of carrying it by myself." Caleb held her gaze. He felt the words land in his chest and stay there, warm and permanent. Not terrifying, the way he'd always expected this moment to be. Just true. "I love you too," he said. "I think I have since about the second morning when you showed up in my kitchen with my property map covered in pencil marks before I was fully awake." She laughed. It came out surprised and genuine, and was the best sound he'd heard in 7 years. "That's an unromantic origin story," she said. "It's an honest one." She turned her hand under his and held it. "Caleb, whatever happens with the case, it's going to work. I know, but whatever happens, I'm here. Not because the ranch needs me, not because I'm useful." She held his eyes. "Because you're the first person in my adult life who looked at everything I am and didn't ask me to make any of it smaller. That's not something I walk away from." He didn't have words for what that meant to him. He didn't try to find them. He came around the table, and she stood up, and he held her in the kitchen of the small house that had been empty for 7 years. And outside, the Colorado wind moved off the mountains, and the stars came out cold and brilliant, and the land lay quiet under its covering of snow. And for the first time since the worst day of his life, Caleb Harden felt completely, solidly, at home. The hearing was scheduled for the second week of November in the county courthouse in Redstone Creek, a room that had never held this many people and was learning about its own capacity the hard way. Every rancher from the valley had come. Their wives had come. Ruth Calloway was in the front row with her arms crossed and an expression that dared anyone to try anything. Desmond sat with Bill Aldridge and the Beaumont brothers and old man Garrett, all of them wearing their good coats and the serious faces of men who understood that the day mattered. Wade Loomis sat near the back. He'd filed every report Nora had asked him to file. He'd signed every witness document Cole had put in front of him. He'd been doing his job for 12 days straight, with a consistency that was partly conscience and partly, Caleb suspected, the experience of watching Nora Shaw hold him to a standard he'd set for himself a long time ago and had let slide. Voss arrived with 2 attorneys and sat at the opposing table with the contained stillness of a man who had not yet accepted the possibility of losing. Cole presented the case in 3 hours. He was methodical and precise, and when he presented Tommy Reeves' statement, the room was so quiet that Caleb could hear the clerk's pen moving across the record. When he presented the survey methodology comparison against the Whitmore precedent, Voss's lead attorney stood twice to object, and was overruled both times by a territorial judge who had the look of a man who'd been briefed on this case in advance and was not pleased about the situation. When Nora was called to testify about her documentation, she walked to the stand with a straight-backed composure that Caleb had come to understand was not performance. It was just how she moved when she knew where she was going. The opposing attorney tried 3 different approaches to undermine her credibility. He referenced the defamation filing in St. Louis, dismissed in 2 weeks, as she'd said. He questioned her legal background. He suggested her compass readings were amateur and unreliable. She answered every question in the same clear, level voice she used for everything. And she didn't lose her composure once. And after the 3rd failed approach, the attorney sat down and didn't try again. When the judge called a recess and the room broke into the particular noise of people who'd been holding tension for 3 hours, Caleb found Nora at the window and stood beside her without saying anything for a moment. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes." She was watching the street below, not quite seeing it. "He mentioned Edmund." "I heard." "I knew he would. I prepared for it." She turned from the window. "It still lands. Every time. I don't know how to make it not land." "Maybe you're not supposed to." He turned to face her. "Maybe the things that hit you are just the things that matter. Doesn't mean they stop you." She looked at him. "When did you get wise?" "I've had good company lately." The corner of her mouth moved. She reached up and straightened his collar, a small domestic gesture so natural that neither of them remarked on it. And then they went back into the courtroom. The judge ruled before 4 o'clock. The boundary survey was invalidated on methodology, consistent with the Whitmore precedent. The 2 preliminary inquiry filings were struck from the territorial record as part of a documented pattern of fraudulent legal action. Gerald Voss and Voss Mining Company were ordered to return the 30 head of cattle, pay restitution for documented property damage across 5 ranches, and cease all operations within a 20-mile radius of Redstone Creek, pending a federal investigation into coordinated land fraud. The federal investigation had been filed that morning. Harlan Cole had been building toward it since the first day he'd read Nora's folder, and he'd moved it quietly and completely. And Voss's attorneys hadn't seen it coming until the judge announced it from the bench. The room erupted. Caleb sat very still in the noise and heard it as if from a slight distance. All that sound of relief and victory and weeks of held breath releasing at once, and felt Nora's hand find his under the table. He held on. Voss left without speaking. His attorneys gathered their papers with the careful movements of men who'd been in losing courtrooms before and knew the procedure. At the door, Voss turned and looked across the room directly at Caleb, and the expression on his face was not rage and not humiliation. It was the particular cold recognition of a man who had encountered something he hadn't calculated for and was filing it away for future reference. Caleb held his gaze without moving. Voss left. The celebration that followed was the spontaneous kind, which was the only kind worth having. Ruth Calloway produced a bottle from somewhere inside her coat, and the back room of her general store became, for one evening, the social center of Redstone Creek. Ranchers who'd been separately afraid for months stood in the same room and discovered, in the discovery of their shared story, something that had been absent from the valley for the 2 years of Voss's pressure. The particular strength of people who know they're not alone. Bill Aldrich shook Nora's hand for a long time and didn't say much, which, from Bill, was the equivalent of a speech. The Beaumont brothers brought their wives, who thanked Nora with a specific gratitude of women who'd watched their families being ground down and hadn't known how to stop it. Old man Garrett, who hadn't left his property in 3 months, stood near the door with a glass of whiskey and kept looking around the room like a man relearning the size of his world. Desmond found Caleb near the back and stood beside him the way Desmond stood beside everything, solid and without ceremony. "She's something," Desmond said. "Yes." "You going to do right by her?" "Already asked." Desmond looked at him sidelong. "She said yes?" "She said yes." A pause. Then Desmond raised his glass. "Good," he said, which from Desmond was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Tommy Reeves came to Caleb quietly near the end of the evening. He was still pale, still carrying the look of someone in the process of reckoning with himself, but something in him had straightened in the last week. "I know I don't have the right to ask anything," Tommy said, "but I need work. Real work. Voss is done in this valley, and the hands that work for him are going to have a hard time finding anything." Caleb studied him. "You know ranch work?" "I grew up on a ranch." "You know why I'd be taking a risk?" "Yes, sir, I do." Tommy met his eyes without flinching, which was the right thing to do. "I'm not asking you to trust me all at once. I'm asking for a chance to earn it." Caleb thought about a man who'd been told by a woman he barely knew to trust her. All the way, not halfway. And what it had cost him to do it, and what it had given back. "Monday morning," he said. 6 o'clock. Tommy nodded. He looked like he might say something else, and then didn't, which was also the right thing to do. Nora appeared at Caleb's shoulder near the end of the evening, her notebook tucked away for the first time in 2 weeks, and her coat on, and her face carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who's been running on purpose and urgency and has just felt both of them release. "Ready?" she said. "Ready." They rode home under a sky full of stars, and the silence between them was the best kind, the kind that doesn't need filling. The mountains were dark shapes against a slightly lighter dark, holding their snow, patient and permanent. The road home was familiar now, in a way it hadn't been a month ago, when Caleb had driven it alone in both directions, and the return had felt like going back to something diminished. It didn't feel like that anymore. Cole was leaving on the morning stage. He'd shaken Caleb's hand and then turned to Nora and said, with the directness of a man who'd spent 60 years being precise, "You have a genuinely extraordinary mind for this work. If you ever want formal training, I know 3 people in Denver who would take you as a student without question." He paused. "Think about it." Nora had thanked him with a composure that lasted until his back was turned, and then she'd stood very still for a moment, with an expression that Caleb recognized as the face of someone receiving something they'd stopped expecting. He hadn't said anything then. He waited until they were home, and the horses were put up and the fire was going, and she was sitting at the kitchen table with her hands flat in front of her and the quiet look of a woman processing something large. "Cole meant it," Caleb said. "I know. Denver's 2 days by stage." She looked up. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that what you did here, the documentation, the Whitmore precedent, walking into that courtroom and holding your ground, that's not something most people can do, trained or otherwise." He sat down across from her. "I'm saying that if there's more of that in you to develop, I don't want to be the reason it doesn't happen." Nora looked at him for a long moment. "You'd be all right without me here." "No," he said plainly. "I wouldn't be all right. I'd manage. Those aren't the same thing." He held her gaze. "But I'd manage, and I'd wait. And when you came home, I'd still be here." She was very still. "You're serious," she said. "I'm always serious." "Caleb," she leaned forward, "I'm not going to Denver. Not now. Maybe not ever. Cole's offer it means more than I can say. But what I want is here." Her voice was steady and certain, in the way it was when she'd thought something through completely. "I want this ranch, and this valley, and the cooperative buying network I've been planning since week 2. And I want to be the person these ranchers call when Voss sends the next man, or someone like him does." She held his eyes. "There will be a next time. Not Voss specifically, but the thing Voss represents doesn't go away because one man loses a court case. This valley needs someone who knows how to fight it." A beat. "I want to be that person. Here. With you." "That's the life you want?" he said. "You're sure?" "I've never wanted anything more clearly in my life." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Stop trying to give me an exit, Caleb. I don't want one." He looked at her. This woman who'd arrived on a stagecoach 3 weeks ago with a trunk and a medical bag and a compass and a notebook, and the fierce, relentless conviction of someone who'd learned the hard way exactly what she was worth, and felt something in him settle so completely and permanently that he understood it would never come loose again. He hadn't known, standing at that stage depot, watching her step down into the dirt of Redstone Creek, that the solution to everything he'd been losing wasn't a practical arrangement, or an extra pair of hands, or a sensible partnership built on mutual need. He hadn't known that what he'd been losing was hope itself. Slow and quiet, the way good things go when you stop protecting them, and that what was walking toward him across that platform was the only thing that could give it back. He knew it now. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday morning with the snow thick on the ground, and the mountains clear and the cattle settled, and the north fence repaired and the ledger balanced, and the cooperative feed arrangement running across 5 ranches, and the federal investigation proceeding in Denver with Harlan Cole as lead counsel, and Tommy Reeves's testimony filed and sealed. On that Thursday morning, in the county clerk's office with Desmond Pike as witness, and Ruth Calloway in her good hat, and Bill Aldrich standing at the back trying to look casual about the fact that he was crying, Caleb Harden and Nora Shaw stood before the county judge and said the words that made everything that had already been true between them official and permanent, and belonging to them both, in the eyes of every law that mattered. The judge asked Caleb if he'd take this woman as his wife. "Without a single reservation," Caleb said, which was not the standard phrasing, and was the most honest thing he'd said in 7 years. The judge asked Nora if she'd take this man. "I already have," she said, "but yes." Ruth Calloway produced a handkerchief from somewhere inside her coat and pretended she wasn't using it. Desmond looked at the ceiling. Bill Aldrich didn't pretend about anything. Outside, the Colorado winter lay over the valley in the particular white stillness that comes before a long, hard season, and the mountains held everything they'd always held. The cold, and the distance, and the indifferent permanence of things that outlast every human struggle played out in their shadow. But inside that small county clerk's office, and on the road home, with their breath-making clouds in the cold air, and their horses moving easy and their hands interlaced across the space between their saddles, and in the months that followed, as the valley rebuilt itself from fear into something stronger, and the ranch grew, and the case concluded, and the water stayed where it belonged, and the land remained theirs. In all of it, through every hard morning, and every argument, and everything that would come that they couldn't yet see, Caleb and Nora Harden built what they had both come to this valley needing most. Not safety, not simplicity, not a life without trouble. A life where trouble met its match, and the match held, and neither of them ever faced any of it alone again. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.